I've decided that my mother will be moving in with us next week, Kevin declared, his eyes locking onto mine. I nearly choked on my coffee. Excuse me? Without discussing it with me? We can't have her here, I rebutted, my voice trembling with a mix of shock and anger. Kevin leaned back, unfazed by my reaction. It's not up for discussion, Jenna. Mom's been through a lot since Dad passed, and she needs our support. My heart raced as I processed his words. Elaine, Kevin's overbearing mother, moving in? The mere thought sent shivers down my spine. But this is our home, Kevin. We should have talked about this first. He scoffed, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. Don't be dramatic. It's just temporary until she gets back on her feet. I bit my tongue, knowing from experience that arguing further would be futile. Kevin had made up his mind, and my opinion didn't matter. Still, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that this would be the beginning of a nightmare. As the days ticked by, the knot in my stomach tightened. I thought back to when Kevin and I first met, how charming and attentive he was. But over the years, that spark had faded, replaced by a growing indifference and a prioritization of his own needs over our relationship. The morning of Elaine's arrival, I braced myself. But nothing could have prepared me for the chaos that ensued. Movers poured in, hauling not just a few suitcases but an entire household's worth of belongings. What's all this? I asked, my voice barely audible over the commotion. Elaine swept in, her presence as domineering as ever. Well, dear, I couldn't possibly leave my precious belongings behind. This is just temporary, after all. I shot Kevin a pleading look, but he simply shrugged, already retreating into his usual detached state. As the movers began rearranging our living room to accommodate Elaine's furniture, I knew my life as I knew it was over. That evening, I called Megan, my best friend and confidant. Tears streamed down my face as I poured out my frustrations, feeling more alone than ever in my own home. I don't know what to do, Meg, I confessed. It's like Kevin doesn't even see me anymore. And now, with his mother here, I feel like an outsider. Megan's soothing voice offered little comfort. You have to stand your ground, Jen. This is your home too, and you can't let them walk all over you. But as the days turned into weeks, Elaine's presence became increasingly suffocating. She took over my kitchen, rearranged my carefully curated decor, and inserted herself into every aspect of our lives. Meanwhile, Kevin's emotional distance grew, and he started spending more and more time away from home, leaving me to fend for myself against his mother's intrusions. With each passing day, Elaine's presence grew more oppressive, her tentacles snaking into every nook and cranny of our once peaceful home. No matter how hard I tried to establish boundaries, she bulldozed right through them, treating our space as her personal kingdom. Jenna, dear, don't you think these curtains would look better over there? She'd say, already rearranging my carefully chosen decor without waiting for a response. Kevin, true to form, remained oblivious to my mounting frustrations. Whenever I tried to broach the subject, he'd brush me off with a dismissive, "Mom's just settling in," or "she means well." Meanwhile, his absences from home became more frequent and prolonged. Business trips, he'd claim, but I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that something more sinister was afoot. One evening, as I pored over our bank statements, a disturbing pattern emerged. Large sums of money, thousands upon thousands, had been steadily disappearing from our joint accounts. My heart raced as I cross-referenced the dates with Kevin's supposed business trips. Desperate for answers, I reached out to an old acquaintance, Greg Wilson, a private investigator with a reputation for discretion. If Kevin was up to no good, Greg would uncover the truth. "I need you to tail my husband," I whispered into the phone, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "I think he's hiding something from me." Greg agreed without hesitation, and the following weeks were a whirlwind of clandestine meetings and hushed conversations as he fed me crumbs of information. "Your husband's been frequenting some unsavory establishments," he reported one afternoon, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Inside were grainy photographs of Kevin entering a seedy-looking casino, his face obscured but his gait unmistakable. My world shattered in that moment, the realization hitting me like a ton of bricks. Kevin, the man I had once loved and trusted, was gambling away our savings, our future, all while letting his mother infiltrate and undermine our home. Confronting him was an exercise in futility. "You're overreacting, as usual," he sneered, his eyes cold and devoid of remorse. If you can't accept the way things are, then maybe you should leave. The venom in his words stung, but I refused to back down. This was my life, my home, and I would be damned if I let him and his wretched mother take it all away from me. With trembling hands, I dialed Megan's number, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I need your help," I choked out. "Kevin, he's been lying to me, stealing from me, and his mother, she's taken over everything." Megan, bless her soul, didn't hesitate. "Pack a bag and come stay with me," she urged. "We'll figure this out together, I promise." As I stuffed my belongings into a suitcase, a newfound sense of determination washed over me. Kevin and Elaine had crossed a line, and they would pay for their betrayal. This was just the beginning. Elaine's domination of our home only intensified after I moved in with Megan. Like a malignant tumor, she metastasized into every corner, leaving no space untouched by her overbearing presence. "That woman has no boundaries," Megan fumed as I recounted the latest indignity. Elaine had redecorated our bedroom without permission, tossing out cherished mementos in favor of her gaudy knickknacks. I could only nod, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. Kevin's betrayal cut deeper than any wound, but it was his mother's insidious meddling that twisted the knife. With each passing day, Kevin grew more distant, his visits to the house growing increasingly rare. When he did show up, it was like a ghost drifting through, offering little more than a cursory greeting before disappearing into the night. "Working late," he'd mumble, his eyes downcast, unable to meet my gaze. I knew better. Greg's surveillance had painted a clear picture. Kevin was frittering away our hard-earned savings at underground gambling dens, chasing a thrill that no amount of money could satisfy. Desperate to stem the bleeding, I took matters into my own hands. I changed the locks, froze our joint accounts, and even went so far as to cancel Kevin's credit cards. Anything to halt his reckless spending before he bled us dry. Elaine, of course, was apoplectic. "How dare you?" she shrieked, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. "This is my son's home, and you have no right." For once, I stood my ground, emboldened by the knowledge that I held the moral high ground. "Your son has been lying and stealing from me," I spat back, my words laced with venom. "If he wants back in, he'll have to earn it." Kevin's response was predictable, a flurry of anger and denial, punctuated by the occasional guilt trip. "You're overreacting, as always," he sneered. "If you loved me, you'd trust me." But I was done being manipulated. With Megan's unwavering support, I dug in my heels, determined to uncover the full extent of his misdeeds. It was a war of attrition, with Elaine and Kevin launching salvo after salvo of emotional and psychological attacks. But I was no longer the meek, deferential wife they thought they knew. This was my life, my home, and I would fight tooth and nail to protect it. Each night, as I lay awake in Megan's spare room, my mind raced with possibilities. How far had Kevin's deception gone? What other secrets lurked beneath the surface? And, perhaps most pressing of all, how could I make them pay for their betrayal? Revenge, once a fleeting thought, had now taken root, a burning ember that I stoked with each fresh indignity. Kevin and Elaine had awoken a fury within me, and by God, they would reap the whirlwind. As the weeks dragged on, my suspicions about Kevin's financial misdeeds only deepened. Despite my efforts to cut off his access to funds, he always seemed to have a steady stream of cash flowing in, money that couldn't be explained by his legitimate income alone. It was Megan who first pointed out the discrepancies. "Look at this," she said, her brow furrowed as she pored over the bank statements I'd managed to obtain. "These deposits don't add up. There's no way he could be earning this much from his job alone." My heart sank as the realization hit me. Kevin was up to something far more nefarious than mere gambling. He was embezzling, siphoning off money from who knows where to fund his vices and Elaine's extravagant lifestyle. With Megan's help, I dug deeper, combing through financial records and piecing together a paper trail that painted an increasingly damning picture. Kevin had been skimming funds from his company's accounts, using his position as a trusted manager to cover his tracks. The evidence was mounting, but I needed more. I needed irrefutable proof, something that would hold up in court and ensure that Kevin and his wretched mother couldn't weasel their way out of facing the consequences. That's when I turned to Greg again. "I need you to follow the money trail. I instructed, my voice steely with determination. Whatever it takes, we need to know where these funds are coming from and where they're going. Greg didn't disappoint. Through a combination of surveillance and good old-fashioned gumshoe work, he uncovered a web of deceit so intricate, so meticulously constructed, that it left me reeling. Kevin, it seemed, had been running a complex embezzlement scheme for years, funneling money into offshore accounts and using shell corporations to launder the ill-gotten gains. And at the center of it all was Elaine, the puppet master pulling the strings, using her son's greed and her own manipulative ways to bankroll their lavish lifestyle. As the pieces fell into place, a white-hot fury burned within me. These people, the ones who were supposed to be my family, had betrayed me in the most despicable way imaginable. They had stolen from me, lied to me, and tried to strip me of my dignity and self-worth. But not anymore. Clutching the thick dossier of evidence that Greg had compiled, I steeled myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. Kevin and Elaine thought they had me backed into a corner, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. When they arrived at Megan's apartment, their usual arrogance was on full display. Elaine swept in first, her nose turned up in disdain, while Kevin trailed behind, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence. Elaine sneered, her eyes narrowing as she took in my defiant stance. Kevin, ever the smooth talker, tried a different tack. Jenna, please, let's be reasonable here. This has all been a big misunderstanding. I said nothing, simply tossing the dossier onto the coffee table with a loud thud. Reasonable? You want to talk about being reasonable? I spat, my voice dripping with contempt. How about you explain these? As they leafed through the damning evidence, their smug expressions melted away, replaced by a mixture of fear and outrage. For once, they were the ones left speechless, their carefully constructed lies unraveling before their very eyes. The satisfaction I felt in that moment was overwhelming. Finally, after months of torment and gaslighting, the tables had turned. Kevin and Elaine were the ones backed into a corner, their misdeeds laid bare for all to see. And I was just getting started. The look of stunned disbelief on Kevin and Elaine's faces was almost comical, if the situation hadn't been so deadly serious. As they flipped through the damning evidence, their mouths agape, I could practically see the gears turning in their twisted minds, desperately searching for a way to wriggle out of this mess they'd created. But there would be no escape. Not this time. I had them dead to rights, their web of lies and deceit exposed for all to see. How did you get this? Kevin stammered, his usual smooth demeanor cracking under the weight of the truth. I fixed him with a steely gaze, reveling in his discomfort. Does it matter? The real question is, what are you going to do about it? Elaine, ever the master manipulator, tried a different tack. Jenna, darling, surely we can work something out, she cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. This is all just a big misunderstanding. I scoffed, my fury rising like a tidal wave. A misunderstanding? You really expect me to believe that? I spat, gesturing to the damning evidence laid out before us. You've been bleeding me dry for years, living off my hard-earned money while treating me like a doormat in my own home. Kevin's eyes narrowed, his mask of charm melting away to reveal the true monster beneath. Watch your tone, he snarled, his voice low and menacing. You're the one who's been making things difficult, constantly questioning my decisions and undermining my authority. The sheer audacity of his words left me momentarily speechless. Undermining his authority? As if he had any right to wield authority over me, after the way he'd betrayed me time and time again. Megan, bless her soul, stepped in before I could unleash the full force of my fury. I think it's time for you two to leave, she said firmly, her gaze fixed on Kevin and Elaine with barely contained contempt. Elaine opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off with a sharp gesture. No, let them stay, I said, my voice laced with a cold, calculated anger. I want them to hear this. Taking a deep breath, I laid it all out, every sordid detail, every lie, every act of theft and betrayal. I spared no punches, letting the full weight of their misdeeds crash down upon them like a tidal wave. As I spoke, I could see the smug arrogance slipping from their faces, replaced by a dawning realization that this time they had gone too far. This time, there would be consequences. "So here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steely and unwavering. "You're going to pack up your things and get out of my house. Every last penny you've stolen will be repaid, with interest. And if you so much as breathe a word of protest, I'll make sure the authorities get a nice, neat package detailing every illegal thing you've done." Silence hung heavy in the air, the weight of my ultimatum sinking in. For a brief moment, I thought Kevin might try to bluster his way out, to hurl threats and insults in a desperate bid to regain control. But then, in a move that surprised us all, Elaine deflated, the fight draining from her eyes. "Fine," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll go." Kevin, ever the dutiful son, followed her lead, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As they gathered their belongings and shuffled out the door, I felt a surge of triumph unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I had won. Against all odds, I had faced down the very people who had tried to destroy me, and I had emerged victorious. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could see a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Kevin and Elaine would face the full consequences of their actions. Of that, I was certain. And as for me, well, I was just getting started. With Kevin and Elaine gone, a weight lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely, unburdened by their toxic presence, but my work was far from over. I needed to ensure they faced the full consequences of their actions. Megan, ever the loyal friend, was by my side every step of the way. "We need to gather allies," she said, her brow furrowed in determination. "People who can corroborate your story, who can testify to Kevin's misdeeds." It was a tall order, but Megan was right. If we were going to take down Kevin and Elaine, we needed strength in numbers. And so we began reaching out to anyone who might have witnessed their duplicity firsthand. To my surprise, the responses poured in, a steady stream of people eager to share their own stories of mistreatment at the hands of my former in-laws. Kevin's coworkers, friends, even distant relatives, all had tales to tell of his arrogance, his greed, and his utter disregard for anyone but himself and his precious mother. As the accounts mounted, a picture began to emerge, one of a man so consumed by his own ambition and entitlement that he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, trampling over anyone who dared stand in his way. With each new revelation, my resolve hardened. These people, these victims, deserved justice as much as I did, and I would be the one to deliver it, no matter the cost. The plan was simple, yet audacious. We would gather our allies, our evidence, and our collective fury and unleash it all in one fell swoop. A public spectacle, a reckoning of sorts, where Kevin and Elaine would be forced to confront the full weight of their misdeeds. The opportunity presented itself in the form of a company gala, a lavish affair that Kevin had once reveled in, strutting about like a peacock in his designer suits and basking in the admiration of his peers. This time, however, the tables would be turned. As the guests arrived, dressed to the nines and sipping champagne, a palpable buzz of anticipation hung in the air. They knew something was afoot, but few could have predicted the bombshell that was about to drop. When the moment was right, I took the stage, my heart pounding in my chest. With Megan and our assembled allies flanking me, I laid it all bare. The lies, the deceit, the embezzlement, and the emotional torment that Kevin and Elaine had inflicted upon us all. The reaction was instant and visceral. Gasps of shock and horror rippled through the crowd, punctuated by the occasional cry of outrage. As I spoke, presenting the meticulously collected evidence, I could see the realization dawning on their faces. The man they had once admired, the man they had trusted, was nothing more than a fraud, a snake in the grass. And then, like a coup de grace, I unveiled the final piece of the puzzle. Video footage, obtained through Megan's resourcefulness, of Kevin and Elaine brazenly spending their ill-gotten gains on lavish vacations and extravagant purchases, all while pretending to be pillars of the community. The silence that followed was deafening, a collective intake of breath as the full scope of their betrayal sank in. And in that moment, I knew we had won. Kevin and Elaine, their faces twisted into masks of rage and humiliation, could do nothing but slink away, their reputations in tatters, their carefully constructed facade crumbling around them. As the dust settled and the crowd dispersed, murmuring in disbelief, I felt a sense of profound catharsis wash over me. The path ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in years, I could see a light at the end of the tunnel. Kevin and Elaine would face the legal consequences of their actions, of that I was certain. But more importantly, they would never again be able to inflict their poison on anyone else. Their reign of terror was over, and I, Jenna Taylor, had been the one to bring them to their knees. It was a victory hard won, but oh how sweet it tasted. The fallout from the disastrous gala was swift and merciless. Within days, Kevin had been unceremoniously fired from his cushy corporate job, his reputation in tatters. Elaine, too, found herself cast out from the social circles she had once lorded over, her name now synonymous with greed and deceit. As for me, I watched their downfall with a mixture of satisfaction and grim determination. This was just the beginning. The first step in holding them accountable for the pain and suffering they had inflicted upon me and so many others. With the evidence we had painstakingly gathered, it was only a matter of time before the legal system caught up to them. My lawyer, a bulldog of a woman named Samantha, wasted no time in filing charges for embezzlement, fraud, and a host of other white-collar crimes. They'll try to wriggle their way out of this. You know, Samantha warned me, her steely gaze fixed on the mountain of documentation before us. People like them always do. They'll plead ignorance, shift blame, anything to avoid taking responsibility. I nodded grimly, my jaw set. Then we'll be ready. We'll make sure they can't escape the consequences of their actions, not this time. True to Samantha's prediction, Kevin and Elaine fought like cornered animals, deploying every legal maneuver and underhanded tactic in their arsenal. But we were prepared, our case airtight and our resolve unshakable. As the legal proceedings dragged on, I took a perverse pleasure in watching their once lavish lifestyle crumble around them. The fancy cars, the designer clothes, the ostentatious jewelry, all of it was slowly stripped away, piece by piece, as their assets were seized and their ill-gotten gains clawed back. Elaine, in particular, seemed to take the loss of her material trappings the hardest. I'll never forget the look of abject horror on her face as the movers carted away her precious antiques and curios, the very things she had prioritized over basic human decency. "You'll pay for this, you ungrateful wretch," she screeched at me, her eyes wild and her perfectly coiffed hair askew. "You've ruined us, destroyed everything we built." I met her vitriol with a steely calm unbowed by her theatrics. "You did this to yourselves," I replied, my voice level. All I did was expose the truth. Kevin, ever the more composed of the two, tried a different tack. In the rare moments when we found ourselves face to face, he would adopt a sickly sweet tone, his words dripping with false sincerity. "Jenna, please, let's put all this nastiness behind us," he would implore, his eyes pleading. "We're family, after all. Surely we can work something out for old time's sake." But I was no longer the naive, easily manipulated woman he had once known. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and I saw him for what he truly was, a snake, a parasite who had fed off my kindness and trust for far too long. "Save your breath, Kevin," I would reply, my voice laced with contempt. "The only thing we have to work out is how much time you'll be serving." And serve time he did, along with his precious mother. As the legal proceedings reached their climax, the weight of the evidence proved too overwhelming to ignore. Kevin was slapped with a lengthy prison sentence for his financial crimes, while Elaine received a hefty fine and probation for her role in the scheme. As they were led away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. For too long, these people had operated with impunity, trampling over anyone who dared stand in their way. But no more. They had finally been brought to heel, their lofty airs and delusions of grandeur shattered. It was a bittersweet victory, to be sure. The scars they had inflicted upon me would never fully heal, and the months of anguish and betrayal could never be undone. But in that moment, as I watched them being hauled off to face the consequences of their actions, I knew that I had emerged from this ordeal stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever before. Kevin and Elaine had tried to break me, but in the end, it was I who had broken them. With Kevin and Elaine finally behind bars, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The long, arduous battle had taken its toll, but I had emerged victorious. Battered, perhaps, but unbroken. As I stood in the spacious living room of my new apartment, surveying the sleek minimalist decor, I couldn't help but marvel at how far I'd come. This fresh start, this sanctuary of my own making, was a testament to my resilience, a tangible reminder that I had reclaimed control of my life. The road here had been paved with hardship and heartache, but also with the unwavering support of those who truly mattered. Megan, my rock through it all, had been by my side every step of the way, offering her steadfast friendship and sage advice whenever the doubts crept in. And then there was Scarlett, my cousin, whose generosity had made this new beginning possible. When she'd heard of my plight, she hadn't hesitated to offer me the keys to this stunning high-rise apartment, a sanctuary far removed from the toxic memories of my former life. "Consider it a fresh start," she had insisted, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and concern. "You've been through hell, Jenna. It's time you had a place of your own, a place where you can heal and rebuild." As I unpacked the final box, carefully arranging my cherished mementos on the sleek shelves, I couldn't help but reflect on the long, winding path that had brought me here. The betrayal, the anguish, the all-consuming fury, it had all been worth it, if only to arrive at this moment of hard-won peace. Of course, not everyone had been so fortunate. Kevin and Elaine, those architects of my suffering, were now behind bars, their grand delusions of wealth and status reduced to a distant memory. From what I'd heard through the grapevine, their fall from grace had been steep and unforgiving. Kevin, once the smooth-talking corporate climber, had been reduced to a hollow shell of a man, his bravado evaporating in the harsh reality of prison life. Elaine, too, had found herself adrift, her once formidable social standing decimated by the revelations of her misdeeds. A small, petty part of me relished in their misery, reveled in the knowledge that they were finally getting a taste of the pain and humiliation they had so callously inflicted upon me and others. But as the days turned into weeks, that vindictive urge faded, replaced by a sense of weary acceptance. They had been the masters of their own undoing, their greed and hubris ultimately proving to be their downfall. As for me, I had emerged from the crucible tempered and anew, ready to forge a life truly worth living. The housewarming party that Megan had insisted on throwing was a testament to just how far I'd come. As I surveyed the gathered crowd of friends, old and new, I was struck by the outpouring of love and support. "To Jenna," Megan declared, raising her glass in a toast, "the strongest, most resilient woman I know. You've been through hell and back, but you never gave up. You never let the bastards grind you down." A chorus of cheers and laughter erupted, buoying my spirits and filling me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. These people, these wonderful, caring individuals, were my true family, the ones who had stood by me when the chips were down, who had believed in me even when I had doubted myself. As the night wore on and the laughter and conversation flowed, I found myself reflecting on the long, winding journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain, the heartache, the soul-crushing betrayal, it had all been a crucible, a trial by fire that had forged me into the woman I was today. And as I looked around at the smiling faces of my friends, my chosen family, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, unbowed and unbroken. For I was Jenna Taylor, survivor and warrior, and my story was just beginning.